The grand ballroom of the Victoria Concert Hall was filled with the most powerful and wealthy people in the city. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls of light. Women wore expensive dresses that cost more than most people earned in a year. Men stood in perfectly tailored suits, holding glasses of champagne and talking about money and politics. This was not a place for ordinary people. This was a place where the rich came to show off their wealth and judge anyone who did not belong to their world. In the corner of this magnificent room stood a woman named. She was 42 years old with silver streaks running through her dark hair. Her dress was simple and black, bought from a small store in her neighborhood. It was clean and neat, but anyone could see it was not expensive. Her shoes were comfortable but old. She carried no jewelry except for a thin silver chain around her neck that had belonged to her mother. Had been invited to this charity event as the evening's entertainment. She was supposed to play the piano for these wealthy guests, but looking around the room, she already felt the cold stares and whispered comments. A group of women nearby looked at her and laughed softly behind their hands. One of them, a tall woman wearing diamonds around her neck, spoke loud enough for to hear. "Is that the pianist? She looks like she wandered in from the street. I cannot believe they could not find someone more appropriate for an event of this level." The words cut through like a knife, but she kept her face calm. She had heard such words before. She had been hearing them her entire life. Growing up in a poor neighborhood on the east side of the city, had learned early that the world was divided into two kinds of people. There were those who had everything, and there were those who had to fight for every small thing they wanted. Love for music had started when she was just 5 years old. Her family lived in a small apartment above a music store. The owner, an old man named Mr., would let Little come downstairs and watch him tune the pianos. One day, when the store was empty, he lifted her onto the bench of an old upright piano and showed her how to play a simple song. From that moment, knew that music was her life. But her family had no money for piano lessons. They could barely afford food and rent. Her father worked 2 jobs at the factory, and her mother cleaned houses for rich families across town. There was no extra money for dreams, so taught herself. She would sneak into the music store whenever she could, practicing on the old pianos when Mr. was not looking. She borrowed books from the library about music theory. She listened to classical music on an old radio that barely worked. By the time she was 12, could play pieces that took other students years to learn. Mr. noticed her talent and began giving her free lessons in secret. He said she had a gift that came once in a generation. But gifts mean nothing without opportunity, and opportunity was something never had. She applied to the city's prestigious music academy when she was 16. Her audition was perfect. The judges were amazed by her skill. But when they saw where she came from, when they learned about her family and her neighborhood, everything changed. The acceptance letter never came. Instead, she received a polite rejection that said she was not the right fit for their institution. Never stopped playing. She worked during the day and practiced at night. She played at small restaurants and local events. She taught piano lessons to children in her neighborhood for almost no money. The years passed, and her talent remained hidden from the world while pianists with half her skill performed in grand concert halls simply because they had the right name or the right connections. Now, at 42, had finally received an invitation to play at a major event. A friend who worked as a caterer had recommended her to the charity organizers. They needed a pianist at the last minute because their original performer had canceled, was cheap and available. That was the only reason she was here. She walked slowly toward the grand piano that stood on a small stage at one end of the ballroom. It was a beautiful instrument, a worth more than everything had ever owned combined. She ran her fingers lightly over its polished surface and felt a connection that she always felt with pianos. They were her friends, her companions through all the lonely years. "Excuse me, are you lost?" Turned to find a man standing behind her. He was perhaps 50 years old, with gray hair slicked back, and a face that seemed permanently set in an expression of disgust. He wore a suit that probably cost as much as earned in 6 months. "I am the pianist for this evening," said quietly. The man laughed. It was not a kind laugh. It was the laugh of someone who found the idea ridiculous. "You, the pianist? I was told we would have a professional musician tonight, not someone who looks like she plays at birthday parties for 5-year-olds. More people gathered around, drawn by the commotion. Could see them looking at her simple dress, her worn shoes, her lack of expensive accessories. She could hear more whispers, more cruel comments. Where did she come from? This must be some kind of joke. I paid $5,000 for my ticket tonight. I expected quality entertainment. Look at her dress. Does she think this is a yard sale?" The man in the expensive suit stepped closer too. His name was Richard, and he was one of the wealthiest men in the city. He owned banks, buildings, and businesses. He was also the main sponsor of tonight's charity event, which meant he believed he had the right to control everything that happened. "I think there has been a mistake," Richard said loudly, making sure everyone could hear. "We cannot have someone like this representing our event. The foundation has standards to maintain." Felt her heart pounding in her chest. Part of her wanted to run away, to escape from these cruel people and their harsh words. But another part of her, a stronger part, remembered all the years she had spent being pushed aside, being told she was not good enough, being every opportunity because of where she came from. She looked at Richard and spoke in a voice that was soft but steady. "May I please have the chance to play? Just one song. If you do not like what you hear, I will leave quietly and you will not have to pay me anything." Richard laughed again, and many of the guests joined him. "Fine," he said with a cruel smile. "Play your little song. Let us all see what kind of talent the lower classes have to offer. I am sure it will be entertaining in its own way." Walked to the piano and sat down on the bench. The ballroom had grown quiet as everyone waited to see what would happen. Some guests were already smirking, ready to laugh at whatever she played. Others pulled out their phones, preparing to record what they expected would be an embarrassing performance they could share with their friends. Closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She placed her fingers on the keys and felt the familiar cool smoothness beneath her touch. In that moment, all the noise and cruelty faded away. There was only her and the piano, two old friends reunited once again. She began to play. The first notes that came from the piano were so soft that people had to stop talking to hear them. It was like the gentle sound of rain falling on leaves in a quiet forest. The melody was simple at first, almost like a lullaby that a mother might sing to her child. But there was something in those notes that made people pause. There was something that touched a place deep inside their hearts. His fingers moved across the keys with a grace that seemed almost magical. She was not just playing music. She was telling a story. The story of a little girl who had nothing but dreams. The story of cold winter nights spent practicing on broken pianos. The story of doors that were always closed, of opportunities that were always given to someone else. The guests in the ballroom stood frozen in their places. The smirks on their faces slowly disappeared. The phones that had been raised to record her embarrassment were lowered one by one. Even Richard, who had been laughing just moments before, stood with his mouth slightly open, unable to look away from the woman at the piano. The music grew stronger now. What had started as a gentle whisper became a powerful wave that filled every corner of the massive room. Played with her whole body, her shoulders moving with the rhythm, her head bowing over the keys as if she was praying. Her fingers flew across the piano so fast they became a blur, hitting notes that seemed impossible for human hands to reach. She was playing a piece that she had composed herself over many years. It had no name because she had never shown it to anyone before. It was her story, her pain, her hope, all transformed into sound. Every struggle she had faced, every tear she had cried, every moment of doubt and despair was woven into this music. There was a section that spoke of the day her father had collapsed at the factory, was 17 years old. The doctors said it was his heart, worn out from years of working too hard. He spent 3 months in the hospital, and the medical bills took everything the family had saved. Had to leave school to work full-time. Her dreams of studying music seemed to die in those hospital corridors. The piano cried out those memories in minor keys that made several guests in the audience wipe their eyes. They did not know the specific story behind the music, but they could feel the sorrow. They could feel the weight of a young woman's dreams being crushed under the pressure of poverty and responsibility. But then the music changed. A new theme emerged, one of hope and determination. This was the part of story where she refused to give up. Even while working long hours at multiple jobs, she continued to practice. She would wake up at 4 in the morning to play before work. She would stay up past midnight, her tired fingers still moving across whatever piano she could find. The melody rose and fell like the waves of an ocean. There were moments of absolute beauty that made people forget to breathe. There were passages so complex that trained musicians in the audience could not understand how one person could play them. Was not just a pianist. She was a force of nature, a storm of emotion and skill that swept through the ballroom and left everyone shaken. In the middle of the room, a woman named stood with tears streaming down her face. She was married to a senator and usually spent these events gossiping about other guests and complaining about the food. But tonight, she could not think about any of that. The music had reached inside her and pulled out feelings she had buried long ago. She remembered being a young girl with dreams of becoming a dancer. She remembered how her wealthy parents had told her that dancing was not appropriate for someone of her status. She had given up her dream and lived the life they wanted for her. Now, listening to play, she mourned the dancer she had never become. Near the bar, a businessman named Thomas gripped his glass so tightly it almost shattered. He was 63 years old and had spent his entire life chasing money. He had millions in the bank, but no one who truly loved him. His children only called when they needed something. His wife had left him years ago. He had traded his soul for success, and now this music was forcing him to face the emptiness of his choices. All around the ballroom, similar transformations were happening. The wealthy guests who had arrived feeling superior and important were now experiencing something they rarely felt. They were feeling the raw power of true art, created not by someone who had been trained in expensive schools or promoted by powerful connections, but by someone who had lived and suffered and survived. Played on, unaware of the effect she was having. Her eyes remained closed, her face a mask of intense concentration. She had entered a state that musicians sometimes call the zone, where the boundary between the player and the instrument disappears. She was no longer playing the piano. She had become the piano. The music flowed through her like electricity, like light, like life itself. The composition moved into its final section. This was the part that had written just last month, sitting alone in her small apartment after another day of being ignored and dismissed. It was about hope, about believing that someday things would be different. The melody was triumphant but also gentle, like the first rays of sunlight after a terrible storm. As the music reached its climax, something extraordinary happened. Added variations that she had never played before, that she had never even planned. Her fingers were moving on their own, creating new passages of stunning beauty. It was as if the piano itself was helping her, adding its voice to her story. The final notes rang out across the ballroom, hanging in the air like golden dust in sunlight. Then there was silence, complete total silence. No one moved, no one spoke, no one even seemed to breathe. Slowly opened her eyes. For a moment she was confused by the quiet. She had expected mocking laughter. She had expected cruel comments. Instead, she saw hundreds of faces staring at her with expressions she could not quite understand. Then Richard did something that shocked everyone in the room, including himself. He began to clap. It was slow at first, just his two hands coming together in hesitant applause. But then others joined him. One person, then 10, then 50, then everyone in the ballroom was clapping and cheering. The applause grew into a thunderous roar that shook the crystal chandeliers. People were standing now, giving a standing ovation that went on and on. Some were crying openly. Others were shouting words of praise. The same people who had mocked her minutes ago were now applauding her like she was the greatest pianist who had ever lived. Remained seated at the piano, overwhelmed by what was happening. She had played thousands of times in her life, but she had never received a reaction like this. She did not know what to do, how to respond to this sudden outpouring of emotion. Richard made his way through the crowd toward the stage. His face was different now. The arrogance and cruelty had been washed away, replaced by something that looked almost like shame. When he reached, he did something that made the entire room gasp. He bowed to her. "I owe you an apology," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "What you just played was the most beautiful thing I have ever heard in my life. I was a fool to judge you based on your appearance. Can you forgive me?" Looked at this powerful man bowing before her, and she felt no anger or resentment. The music had cleansed her of those feelings. She simply nodded and said, "There is nothing to forgive. The music says everything that needs to be said." But this was only the beginning of a night that would change life forever in ways she could never have imagined. The crowd gathered around like bees around honey. People who would normally never speak to someone like her were now pushing forward, desperate to shake her hand, to compliment her, to be close to her. Their faces shone with excitement and wonder, as if they had witnessed something miraculous. A woman with silver hair and kind eyes approached first. She introduced herself as the director of the National Philharmonic Orchestra. Her hands trembled slightly as she spoke. "In 40 years of working in classical music, I have never heard anything like what you just played. Who taught you? Where did you study? Why have I never heard of you before?" Smiled softly, still feeling dizzy from everything that was happening. "I taught myself mostly. An old man named Mister gave me some lessons when I was young. I never went to any music school." His eyes widened with disbelief. "That is impossible. The technical skill you demonstrated, the emotional depth, the original composition itself. These are things that take decades of professional training to develop. Self-taught musicians simply do not play like that." "I have been playing for 37 years, said. "Every day, whenever I could find a piano, music was all I had." More people crowded around, each wanting to hear story. She found herself telling them about growing up poor, about practicing on broken pianos in Mister's shop, about being rejected from music school despite her talent. As she spoke, she saw the shame on many faces. These were people who had benefited from the very system that had kept her down. A young man named David Sterling pushed through the crowd. He was in his early 30s, with dark curly hair and glasses that kept sliding down his nose. He worked as a music producer for one of the biggest record labels in the country. His phone was already in his hand, and he was talking excitedly. "I have already sent a clip of your performance to my boss. He wants to sign you immediately. We can have you recording an album by next month. This could be huge, absolutely huge." Did not know how to respond. Recording an album. That was something that happened to other people, to people with connections and opportunities. Not to a 42-year-old woman who had spent her life playing in empty restaurants and rundown bars. "I am not sure," she began, but David interrupted her. "Do you know how many views your performance is getting right now? Someone live streamed it. You are trending on every social media platform. People are calling you the discovery of the century." Felt the room spinning around her. This was too much, too fast. Just an hour ago, she had been standing alone in the corner, being mocked and humiliated. Now people were talking about record deals and viral videos. Gently took his arm and guided her away from the crowd, to a quiet corner of the ballroom. "I understand this must be overwhelming," said kindly. "But please, Do not let these people take advantage of you. You have something incredibly special, something rare. You need to protect it. I do not even understand what is happening, admitted. I just came here to play piano. I was told I would be paid $300 for the night. Laughed, but it was a sad laugh. $300. My dear, what you played tonight was worth more than everything in this room combined. You have been undervalued your entire life, and that ends tonight. Will you let me help you? Before could answer, Richard approached them. He looked different now, smaller somehow, as if the events of the evening had deflated his usual arrogance. Mrs., may I speak with Miss privately? Looked at, who nodded slightly. The orchestra director walked away, but not before giving Richard a warning look. Miss, Richard began, I must confess something to you, something that has been eating at me since you started playing. Waited, not sure what to expect. 26 years ago, I was on the board of admissions at the Royal Academy of Music. A young girl from the east side of the city auditioned for us. She played a Chopin piece so beautifully that several judges were moved to tears. I voted against admitting her. Felt her heart stop. The Royal Academy of Music was the school that had rejected her when she was 16. It was you, Richard continued, his voice breaking. I recognize that same passion, that same raw talent. I voted against you because I believed that someone from your background could never truly belong in the world of classical music. I thought I was protecting the institution's reputation. I was wrong. Terribly, unforgivably wrong. Stared at this man who had helped destroy her dreams so many years ago. Part of her wanted to scream at him, to tell him about all the years of struggle and pain that his decision had caused. But another part of her, the part that had poured everything into the music she played tonight, knew that anger would not heal anything. Why are you telling me this? She asked quietly. Because you deserve to know the truth, and because I want to make things right if that is even possible. I have more money than I could ever spend. Let me use it to help you. Let me fund your career, promote your music, give you the platform you should have had decades ago. Shook her head slowly. I do not want your money, mister. Then what do you want? He asked desperately. There must be something I can do. Thought about this question for a long moment. What did she want? For so many years she had simply wanted to survive, to keep playing music despite everything. But now, suddenly, new possibilities were opening before her. There is a music school in my neighborhood, she finally said. It is falling apart. The instruments are broken, the teachers are unpaid volunteers, and the city wants to close it down. Hundreds of children from poor families go there to learn music. If you truly want to help, save that school. Richard nodded immediately. Done. I will make sure that school has everything it needs. New instruments, paid teachers, a complete renovation. What else? That is enough, Sid. That is more than enough. From across the room, David, the music producer, was waving his phone excitedly. He hurried over with news that made his head spin even more. The video has hit 5 million views. 5 million in less than an hour. My boss just authorized me to offer you a $1 million recording contract. This is unheard of for an unknown artist. Around them, the other guests had pulled out their own phones and were watching the video of his performance. Many were sharing it with friends and family, adding comments about the incredible talent they had just witnessed in person. One older gentleman approached with tears still visible in his eyes. He introduced himself as George Palmer, a retired concert pianist who had performed in the world's greatest halls. Young lady, he said, though was not particularly young anymore, I have heard play. I have heard all the legendary pianists of the last century. What you played tonight belongs in that company. You have a gift that cannot be taught, cannot be bought. Please, please, do not let it go to waste any longer. Thanked him, still struggling to process everything. Just this morning, she had woken up in her tiny apartment worried about how she would pay next month's rent. Now she was being compared to the greatest pianists in history. As the evening continued, more offers poured in. A famous concert hall in Vienna wanted to book her for a performance. A documentary filmmaker wanted to tell her story. A piano company wanted her to be their spokesperson. Each offer was more incredible than the last. But through it all, kept thinking about one thing. She kept thinking about the children at that music school in her neighborhood. She kept thinking about all the young musicians who were right now where she had been 30 years ago, talented and passionate, but with no way to escape their circumstances. She had been given a second chance, a miracle she had stopped believing in long ago. But what mattered now was not just her own success. What mattered was using this moment to open doors for others who had been locked out for too long. The night was far from over, and the biggest surprises were still to come. By midnight, the charity event had transformed into something entirely different. What was supposed to be a formal gathering for wealthy donors had become an impromptu celebration of. The scheduled program was forgotten. The silent auction that was meant to raise money for the charity sat abandoned in the corner. Everyone only wanted to talk about the unknown pianist who had appeared out of nowhere and played the most extraordinary music any of them had ever heard. Sat in a small room behind the main ballroom, trying to catch her breath. Had insisted that she take a break from the overwhelming attention. A glass of water sat untouched on the table beside her. Her hands were shaking slightly, and she could not tell if it was from exhaustion or excitement. The door opened, and a woman entered. She was perhaps in her 60s, elegantly dressed but in a way that seemed less showy than the other guests. Her gray hair was pulled back in a simple bun, and her eyes were sharp and intelligent. She moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing to prove to anyone. "May I sit?" the woman asked. Nodded, and the woman settled into the chair across from her. "My name is Helena Crane. I run the Crane Foundation for the Arts. We search the world for undiscovered talent, people who have been overlooked by the traditional systems of recognition and opportunity." Had heard of the Crane Foundation. It was one of the most prestigious arts organizations in the world, famous for supporting artists from unconventional backgrounds. "I have been watching you all evening," Helena continued. "Not just your performance, which was magnificent, but how you have handled everything since. Most people, when they suddenly find themselves at the center of so much attention, lose their sense of themselves. They grab at every opportunity, say yes to everything, let others control their fate. You have done none of that." "I am not sure what I am supposed to do," admitted. "This morning I was nobody. Now people are offering me millions of dollars. It does not feel real." Helena smiled warmly. "That is precisely why I wanted to speak with you away from all those people with their contracts and offers. What happened tonight is just the beginning. Tomorrow, your life will be completely different. The video of your performance has now been viewed by over 20 million people. By this time next week, it will be hundreds of millions. You are about to become one of the most famous musicians in the world." Felt dizzy again. 20 million people had watched her play. She could barely comprehend what that meant. "The question is," Helena continued, "what do you want to do with that fame? What matters to you?" Thought about this carefully. She thought about the children at the music school. She thought about all the years she had spent in obscurity, not because she lacked talent, but because she lacked opportunity. "I want to change things," she finally said. "Not just for myself, but for everyone who has ever been told they do not belong in the world of art and music because of where they came from." Helena nodded approvingly. "Then let me tell you about someone I think you should meet." She pulled out her phone and showed a photograph of a young boy. He looked to be about 12 years old, with dark skin and bright, curious eyes. He was sitting at a piano in what appeared to be a school gymnasium. "This is Johnson. He lives in a small town in Mississippi. His family can barely afford food, much less piano lessons. But 2 years ago, a volunteer at his school heard him playing on an old keyboard and recorded it. That recording made its way to us at the Crane Foundation. Helena played the recording for. The sound quality was poor, but what came through was unmistakable. The boy had extraordinary talent, the kind that appeared once in a generation. Is just one of thousands of children like him around the world, Helena said. Children with incredible gifts but no way to develop them. The current system of music education only serves those who can afford it. Everyone else is left behind. Listened, feeling a growing sense of purpose. What do you want me to do? She asked. Tonight, you became a symbol. People saw someone from a poor background triumph over prejudice and prove that talent does not respect social class. That is a powerful message. I want you to help me spread it, not just by performing, but by becoming an advocate for all the out there who will never get a chance unless something changes. Looked at the photograph of again. She saw herself in his eyes, the same determination she had felt at his age, the same desperate hope that someday, somehow, someone would give her a chance. Yes, she said without hesitation. Whatever you need me to do, I will do it. Helena smiled with genuine warmth. I was hoping you would say that. Now, there is something else you should know. Your performance tonight was not an accident. You were not invited here by chance. Frowned confused. What do you mean? I was recommended by my friend who works as a caterer. Helena shook her head. Your friend was approached by one of my associates. We have been watching you for years. We knew about your talent long before tonight. We have recordings of you playing at various small venues over the past decade. Every single one was extraordinary. Felt a strange mix of emotions. She had always believed that no one was paying attention to her music. Finding out that she had been watched, studied, and even planned for without her knowledge was unsettling. Why did you wait so long? She asked. Why did you not help me years ago? Helena sighed deeply. Because I wanted you to be ready. I have seen many talented artists destroyed by fame that came too quickly. They were not prepared for the pressure, the criticism, the constant demands. They burned out or broke down. I wanted to make sure that when your moment came, you would be strong enough to handle it. So tonight was some kind of test. In a way, yes, but you passed beautifully. You showed grace under pressure. You responded to cruelty with dignity. You asked for nothing for yourself except to help others. Those are the qualities I was looking for. Sat in silence, processing this new information. Part of her was angry that Helena had manipulated events behind the scenes, but another part of her understood. The music industry was brutal. Without someone watching out for her, she might have been chewed up and spit out. What happens now? She asked. Helena leaned forward, with an excited gleam in her eyes. Now, we begin the real work. Tomorrow morning, my foundation will announce a major new initiative called the Second Chance Project. It will identify and support talented musicians from disadvantaged backgrounds around the world. We will provide instruments, lessons, scholarships, and performance opportunities to children who would otherwise never have a chance. And you want me to be the face of this project. I want you to be more than that. I want you to be its heart and soul. People do not donate to programs. They donate to stories, to people they believe in. Your story is the most powerful argument for this project that I could ever imagine. Outside the small room, could hear the party continuing. People were still talking about her performance, still sharing the video, still marveling at what they had witnessed. But in this quiet space, she was making decisions that would affect her life and the lives of countless others for years to come. She stood up and extended her hand to Helena. I will do it, not for the fame or the money, but for all the children like, and for the little girl I used to be, who had nothing but a dream and an old piano. Helena shook her hand firmly. Welcome to the beginning of your real journey. The concert tonight was just the opening act. The real performance starts now. As they walked back to the ballroom together, felt a sense of purpose she had never experienced before. She had spent her whole life playing music for herself, as a way to survive and cope with the difficulties of her existence. Now, her music had a bigger mission. It was going to change the world. But neither nor Helena knew that there were people in the ballroom who had very different plans for what would happen next. 3 weeks after the charity event, life had been completely transformed. The video of her performance had reached over 500 million views worldwide. News programs in dozens of countries had told her story. Magazine covers featured her photograph with headlines calling her the piano miracle or the discovery of the century. She had appeared on morning talk shows, given interviews to famous journalists, and received invitations from the most prestigious concert halls in the world. The music school in her neighborhood had been saved, just as Richard had promised. Construction crews had begun renovating the building, and a fleet of new instruments had arrived. Local children who had never touched a quality piano before were now learning on instruments worth thousands of dollars. Had moved out of her tiny apartment and into a modest house that the Crane Foundation had helped her purchase. She had chosen to stay in her old neighborhood despite offers of luxury apartments in wealthy areas. She wanted to remain connected to the community that had shaped her. But with all the success came challenges she had not anticipated. It started with small things. Criticism on social media from people who claimed she was not really that good, that the video had been edited to make her sound better, that the whole story was exaggerated or even fake. Tried to ignore these voices, but they were loud and persistent. Then came the professional attacks. A music critic named Wilson wrote a vicious article claiming that self-taught background made her technique unacceptable by professional standards. He called her a social media sensation rather than a real musician, and predicted that she would fade away within a year when people realized she had been overhyped. Other classical music insiders echoed similar sentiments. They did not like that someone from outside their world had suddenly become more famous than pianists who had spent decades building their careers through proper channels. Some said she was taking opportunities away from deserving artists. Others questioned whether she really belonged in concert halls alongside trained professionals. Tried not to let these criticisms affect her, but they did. She began to doubt herself, to wonder if maybe the critics were right. Maybe the night at the charity event had been a fluke, a one-time miracle that she could never repeat. Her first major concert was scheduled for the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. It would be broadcast live to millions of viewers around the world. The pressure was immense. If she performed well, she would silence her critics forever. If she failed, it would confirm everything they had been saying about her. 2 days before the concert, sat alone in her living room, staring at the piano she had purchased with her first real earnings. Her fingers would not move. Every time she tried to play, she felt paralyzed by fear. What if she could not do it again? What if the magic was gone? The doorbell rang. Opened it to find Johnson standing on her doorstep. The 12-year-old boy from Mississippi, the one Helena Crane had shown her in the photograph, was right there in front of her. Behind him stood a woman who must have been his grandmother, holding a worn suitcase. "Miss," said shyly, "Miss Helena said you might be able to help me prepare for my audition at the Music Academy next month." Had completely forgotten that she had agreed to mentor. The Crane Foundation had arranged for him to travel to the city and stay with his grandmother while he prepared for his chance at a proper music education. Looking at this boy, seeing the hope and nervousness in his eyes, felt something shift inside her. She had been so focused on her own fears that she had lost sight of why she was doing this in the first place. It was not about proving herself to critics or performing for fame. It was about making sure children would have the opportunities she never had. "Come in," she said warmly. "Let me hear you play." The boy sat at his piano and began to perform. His technique was rough in places, the result of having no proper teacher, but his natural talent was undeniable. More importantly, could see the same fire in him that she had felt at his age. Music was not just something he did, it was part of who he was. For the next 2 days, threw herself into teaching. She forgot about her own upcoming concert and focused entirely on helping this young boy develop his gifts. She showed him techniques she had discovered through decades of practice. She told him stories about the great composers and what their music meant. She helped him understand that playing piano was not about hitting the right notes. It was about communicating something true and beautiful to the world. On the morning of her Kennedy Center concert, woke up feeling different. The fear was still there, but it no longer controlled her. Working with had reminded her of why she played music in the first place. It was not for critics or audiences or fame. It was because music was the only way she knew to express the deepest parts of herself. Came to see her before she left for the venue. "Miss, are you scared?" he asked. "A little," she admitted. "But you are amazing. Everyone knows you are amazing." Smiled and knelt down to look in the eyes. "Let me tell you a secret. Being afraid is not bad. It means you care about what you are doing. The trick is not to let the fear stop you. Use it as fuel. Let it make you even more determined to show the world what you can do." "Is that what you did at the charity event, when all those rich people were making fun of you?" Nodded. "I was terrified, but I knew that if I let them win, if I walked away without playing, I would regret it for the rest of my life. So I sat down at that piano and played like my life depended on it, because, in a way, it did." Hugged her tightly. "You are going to be great tonight, I know it." Drove to the Kennedy Center with Helena Crane and several members of the Foundation's team. As they approached the massive building, saw something that made her breath catch in her throat. Thousands of people were lined up outside, waiting to get in. Many of them were holding signs with messages of support. Some had traveled from other states or even other countries just to see her perform. But mixed among the supporters were protesters. They carried signs with messages like "Real musicians only" and "Classical music is not a viral video." Wilson, the critic who had attacked her, was being interviewed by a news crew, repeating his claims that was not qualified to perform on such a prestigious stage. "Ignore them," Helena said firmly. "They are just noise. Focus on what you came here to do." Walked into the backstage area and prepared for the most important performance of her life. She could hear the audience filing into the seats, the low murmur of thousands of voices creating a sound like a distant ocean. A stagehand knocked on her door. "5 minutes, miss." Looked at herself in the mirror. She was wearing a beautiful black gown that the Foundation had helped her choose. Her hair was styled elegantly. She looked like a professional performer, like someone who belonged on this stage. But inside, she was still the same woman who had grown up poor, who had taught herself on broken pianos, who had been rejected and dismissed for most of her life. She thought about her father, who had worked himself nearly to death to keep the family fed. She thought about her mother, who had encouraged her to keep playing even when it seemed hopeless. She thought about Mr., the kind old man who had given her free lessons all those years ago. She thought about waiting hopefully for his own chance to shine. All of these people were with her now. Their hopes and dreams and sacrifices were woven into her story. She was not performing just for herself. She was performing for everyone who had ever been told they did not belong. The stagehand knocked again. "It is time, miss." Took a deep breath and walked toward the stage. The curtain parted, and she stepped into the bright lights. The audience erupted in applause, but she also heard scattered boos from the protesters who had managed to get tickets. She did not react to either the cheers or the jeers. She simply walked to the magnificent grand piano that sat alone in the center of the stage, sat down on the bench, and placed her fingers on the keys. The hall fell silent and began to play. The Kennedy Center held nearly 3,000 people that night, and every single one of them fell completely silent as fingers touched the keys. She had chosen to begin with one of the most difficult pieces in the classical piano repertoire, Piano Concerto No. 3. It was a bold choice, one that would immediately prove to her critics whether she was a real musician or just a viral video sensation. The opening notes filled the vast hall with a sound that seemed to come from somewhere beyond human capability. Played with her eyes closed, her body swaying gently with the rhythm, her fingers dancing across the keys with impossible speed and precision. She was not thinking about the audience or the cameras broadcasting her performance to millions around the world. She was not thinking about Wilson or the protesters or anyone who doubted her. She was simply letting the music flow through her, like water through a river. In the audience, the critics who had come expecting to see her fail sat frozen in their seats. What they were hearing was not just technically perfect. It was emotionally devastating. Brought something to that they had never heard before, a rawness and vulnerability that made the familiar notes feel completely new. Wilson gripped the armrests of his seat. His face had gone pale. He had built his reputation on tearing down artists who he believed did not deserve success. He had written hundreds of articles claiming that proper musical training was essential, that self-taught musicians could never match those who had studied at prestigious institutions. Now, this woman from the wrong side of the city was destroying every argument he had ever made. The first movement ended, and there was a moment of absolute stillness. Then the audience erupted into applause that broke all protocols for classical concerts. People were not supposed to clap between movements, but they could not help themselves. The sound of their appreciation shook the walls of the famous hall. Paused briefly, catching her breath, and then launched into the second movement. This was the slower, more emotional section of the piece. The melody was heartbreakingly beautiful and played it like she was telling the story of her entire life. The years of struggle, the rejection, the loneliness of practicing alone while the world ignored her. All of it came through in every note. People in the audience were crying openly. A senator who was known for his cold, calculating personality wiped tears from his eyes. A famous actress who had seen countless performances in her career whispered to her companion that she had never experienced anything like this. Backstage, Helena Crane watched through a monitor with tears streaming down her face. She had believed in for years, had carefully planned this moment, but even she was stunned by what she was witnessing. This was more than just a performance. This was art of the highest order, the kind that comes along once in a lifetime. The second movement flowed seamlessly into the third, and increased her intensity even further. Her fingers were a blur now, hitting notes so fast that it seemed humanly impossible. The orchestra accompanying her struggled to keep up. The conductor, a renowned maestro who had led orchestras around the world, had to adjust his tempo multiple times because was pushing the music into new territory. For nearly 40 minutes, commanded the attention of everyone in that hall and millions more watching from home. When the final notes crashed through the auditorium, there was a single second of silence before the entire audience rose to their feet as one. The standing ovation lasted for 12 minutes. Took bow after bow, her eyes wet with tears, her hands trembling from the effort she had just expended. Flowers were thrown onto the stage. People shouted her name over and over. In the third row, Wilson did something he had never done before. He stood up and joined the applause. His assistant looked at him with shock. "But sir, you said she was not a real musician." Wilson shook his head slowly, still clapping. "I was wrong. I have never been more wrong about anything in my life." After the concert, there was a reception in the Kennedy Center's grand foyer. Was surrounded by admirers, including some of the same people who had doubted her. She accepted their compliments graciously, without any hint of resentment or revenge in her manner. Wilson made his way through the crowd and stood before her. His face was a mixture of embarrassment and genuine admiration. "Miss, I owe you an apology. I wrote terrible things about you without ever hearing you play in person. I let my prejudices cloud my judgment. What you did tonight was one of the greatest performances I have ever witnessed in 50 years of covering classical music. Looked at this man, who had tried so hard to destroy her reputation before she even had a chance. Mr. Wilson, I read your articles about me. They hurt, but I understand where they came from. You have spent your whole career defending a world that you believe has standards and traditions worth protecting. I respect that, even if I disagree with some of your conclusions. What conclusion would that be? Wilson asked. The conclusion that only people who come from certain backgrounds, who study at certain schools, who follow certain paths, can be real musicians. Music does not care about any of those things. Music only cares about truth and passion and skill. Those can come from anywhere. Wilson nodded slowly, absorbing her words. Would you allow me to interview you? A proper interview, not an attack piece. I want to tell your story the right way. Considered this offer. Having Wilson write positively about her would do more to legitimize her in the classical music world than almost anything else. On one condition, she said. Name it. Half the interview has to be about the Second Chance Project and the children we are trying to help. My story is not unique. There are thousands of talented children out there who will never get a chance unless something changes. That is the real story. Wilson agreed immediately. Later that night, returned to her home to find and his grandmother waiting up for her. The boy had watched the entire concert on television and was bouncing with excitement. Miss, you were incredible. The way you played that fast part, I have never heard anyone do that before. Hugged him tightly, feeling more grateful in that moment than she had ever felt in her life. Not grateful for the fame or the applause or the recognition. Grateful that she had found a purpose beyond her own success. Grateful that she could use her gift to open doors for others. Your turn is coming, she said. Your audition is in 3 weeks. We have a lot of work to do. For the next 20 days, threw herself into preparing for his audition at the Royal Academy of Music, the same school that had rejected her so many years ago. She taught him everything she knew, pushed him to reach levels he did not know he could achieve, and helped him believe in himself. On the day of his audition, accompanied to the academy, as she walked through those halls for the first time since her own rejected application 26 years earlier, she felt a strange mix of emotions. This place had once been her greatest dream and her deepest wound. Now she was returning as one of the most famous pianists in the world, bringing with her a young boy who carried the same dreams she once had. The admissions panel included several professors who had been there when auditioned. They recognized her immediately and shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Sat at the piano, looking nervous but determined. Gave him an encouraging nod from her seat in the back of the room. The boy took a deep breath and began to play. And within 30 seconds, knew that everything she had worked for was about to pay off in ways she had never imagined. Played like someone possessed by the spirit of music itself. His small hands flew across the keys with a precision that seemed impossible for a 12-year-old who had never received formal training. He had chosen to perform a piece by Chopin, the same composer whose music had played at her own doomed audition so many years ago. But while it had been rejected despite her perfect performance, was creating something that went beyond perfect. He was creating magic. The admissions panel sat in stunned silence. Professor Charles Gregory, who had been one of the judges at audition 26 years earlier, leaned forward in his chair with his mouth slightly open. He was 73 years old now, and in all his decades at the academy, he had never heard a child play like this. Watched from the back of the room, her heart swelling with pride and emotion. She could see in everything she had once been. The same raw talent, the same deep connection to the music, but had something she had never had at his age. He had someone who believed in him, someone who understood his gift and was determined to help him develop it. When finished playing, there was a long moment of silence. Then Professor Gregory did something unusual. He stood up from behind the judge's table and walked toward the piano. The other panel members exchanged confused glances, unsure what was happening. Gregory stopped in front of and looked down at the boy with an expression of profound wonder. "Young man, do you know what you just did?" Shook his head nervously. "You just played one of the most technically demanding pieces in the romantic repertoire with a level of emotional depth that most professional pianists never achieve. Where did you learn to do that?" Looked back at. "Miss taught me. She said that technique does not mean anything without heart. She said the piano is not about showing what you can do. It is about showing who you are." Gregory turned to look at. Recognition flickered across his face, followed quickly by shame. He remembered her. He remembered the brilliant young woman who had played just as extraordinarily in this same room and had been rejected because of prejudice and snobbery. "Miss," he said, walking toward her, "I must speak with you." Stood and faced the professor who had helped deny her dreams. "You remember me," she said. "It was not a question. I have never forgotten you. Your audition haunted me for years. I knew we had made a terrible mistake, but by the time I worked up the courage to try to contact you, you had disappeared. I thought I would never have the chance to apologize." Looked at this old man who had carried guilt for over 2 decades. "The past cannot be changed," she said gently, "but the future can, deserves a chance here. He deserves the opportunities I never had." Gregory nodded firmly. "He will have them. I give you my word. Not because you are famous now or because the world is watching, but because that boy has one of the greatest natural talents I have ever encountered. It would be criminal to turn him away." The other judges quickly agreed. Was not just accepted to the Royal Academy of Music. He was offered a full scholarship that would cover his entire education, from housing to meals to personal instruction from the finest teachers in the country. When heard the news, he burst into tears. His grandmother, who had sacrificed everything to give him this chance, held him tightly while her own tears flowed. Watched this moment and felt something shift inside her. This was why she had been given her gift. Not for personal glory, but for moments like this. Over the next few months, the Second Chance project expanded beyond anything Helena Crane had originally imagined. Story had inspired donations from around the world. Millions of dollars poured in, allowing the foundation to identify and support talented children on every continent. Music schools in poor neighborhoods were renovated. Scholarships were created. A network of mentors was established to guide young musicians just as had guided. Traveled constantly, performing in the greatest concert halls on earth while also visiting small towns and poor communities to find the next generation of musical talent. She played in Carnegie Hall and in school gymnasiums. She performed for presidents and for children who had never seen a piano before. Everywhere she went, she told the same message. Talent is universal. It exists in every community, every culture, every corner of the world. The only thing lacking is opportunity. Her fame continued to grow. She released 3 albums that all went platinum. She won every major award in classical music. Critics who had once doubted her now compared her to the greatest pianists in history, but through it all, remained grounded. She never moved to a wealthy neighborhood. She never surrounded herself with expensive things. She continued to live simply and to pour most of her earnings into the Second Chance project. 1 year after the Kennedy Center concert, received an invitation that surprised even her. The royal family of England had requested a private performance at Palace. It was an honor given to only the most prestigious artists in the world. Flew to London with Helena Crane, who had now been studying at the Academy for 8 months, and was already outpacing students twice his age. The boy had grown more confident and skilled, but he remained humble and grateful for everything that had been given to him. The night before the Palace performance, could not sleep. She walked through the streets of London in the early morning hours, thinking about how far she had come. Just 18 months ago, she had been an unknown woman playing piano in empty restaurants for tips that barely covered her rent. Now she was about to perform for royalty. As the sun rose over the ancient city, found herself standing in front of a small music shop. The sign said it had been in business for over 100 years. On impulse, she pushed open the door and went inside. The shop was filled with instruments of all kinds, but eyes were drawn to an old upright piano in the corner. It looked like it had seen better days. The wood was scratched, some of the keys were yellowed with age, and it was clearly in need of tuning. But something about this piano called too. She walked over to it and sat down on the worn bench. Without thinking, she began to play. The shopkeeper, an elderly man who had been arranging sheet music, stopped what he was doing and listened. The piano was old and out of tune, but the music that came from it was pure and beautiful. Played a simple melody, something she had made up as a child practicing on the broken pianos in Mr. Shop. When she finished, the shopkeeper approached her with tears in his eyes. "I have owned this shop for 50 years," he said. "I have heard many people play many instruments, but I have never heard anyone make music like that on such an old piano." Smiled and patted the instrument affectionately. The best music does not come from perfect instruments. It comes from the heart of the person playing. She asked to buy the piano. The shopkeeper tried to give it to her for free, saying it was an honor to have someone like her play in his shop, but insisted on paying. She arranged to have the piano shipped back to her home in America, where it would join her collection not as a showpiece but as a reminder. A reminder that music could come from anywhere and anyone. A reminder that old and worn and imperfect things could still create beauty. A reminder of where she came from and why she did what she did. That evening, performed for the royal family in one of the most beautiful rooms she had ever seen. The audience included kings and queens, princes and princesses, diplomats and dignitaries from around the world. She played for 2 hours, moving through pieces that ranged from powerful and dramatic to soft and intimate. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. The monarch personally thanked her and announced that the royal family would be making a substantial donation to the Second Chance Project. But the most meaningful moment came later, when a young girl of about 10 approached shyly. She was the daughter of one of the palace servants, allowed to attend the performance as a special privilege. "Miss," the girl whispered, "I want to play piano like you someday, but my family cannot afford lessons." Knelt down to look the girl in the eyes. "What is your name?" "Sophie." Took Sophie's hands in her own. "Sophie, if you truly love music, nothing will stop you. Do you know how I learned to play? I practiced on broken pianos in a shop where I was not even supposed to be. I taught myself from library books. I played for anyone who would listen and many who would not. Opportunity did not find me. I had to fight for every chance I got." She paused and smiled warmly. "But you do not have to fight alone. Give me your name and address. I will make sure you get the lessons you need." The girl's face lit up with joy. "Do you promise?" "I promise," said. And it was a promise she would keep, just as she had kept all her promises since that night at the charity event when everything changed. But the greatest chapter of story was still waiting to be written. 2 years had passed since the night that changed everything, was now recognized as one of the greatest pianists alive. She had performed on every major stage in the world. Her albums had sold millions of copies. Her face appeared on magazine covers and billboards. She had met presidents and prime ministers, celebrities and royalty. But despite all the fame and success, she remained the same woman who had grown up poor and taught herself to play on broken pianos. The Second Chance Project had become a global movement. Over 10,000 children from disadvantaged backgrounds were now receiving music education through programs it helped create. Many of them were already showing remarkable talent. Some had begun performing professionally. A few had even received scholarships to prestigious music schools just like, who was now 14 and being called a prodigy by everyone who heard him play. Was 44 years old and feeling more fulfilled than she had ever imagined possible. But on a quiet Tuesday morning, she received a phone call that would shake her to her core. "Miss, this is Dr. Sandra from Memorial Hospital. You are listed as the emergency contact for James." His heart stopped. Mr. The old man who had given her free piano lessons when she was a child. The man who had believed in her when no one else did. She had tried to stay in touch with him over the years, sending him money and visiting when she could, but he was now 92 years old and his health had been declining. "What happened?" asked her voice trembling. "He suffered a stroke this morning. I am afraid it is serious. You should come as soon as you can." Canceled everything on her schedule and rushed to the hospital. When she arrived, she found Mr. lying in a bed surrounded by machines and tubes. His eyes were closed and his breathing was shallow. A nurse explained that he had drifted in and out of consciousness and might not have much time left. Sat beside his bed and took his frail hand in hers. "Mister, it is me. I am here." The old man's eyes fluttered open. Recognition slowly dawned on his face, and he managed a weak smile. "Little," he whispered, "not so little anymore. I saw you on television, playing for all those important people. I was so proud." Tears streamed down his face. "Everything I have, everything I have become, I owe to you. You believed in me when no one else did. You gave me lessons when I could not pay. You let me practice in your shop even when you were not supposed to." Mr. squeezed her hand weakly. "You had the gift. I just helped you find it. The music was always inside you." They talked for hours, sharing memories of those early years when was just a child with a dream. Mr. told her stories she had never heard before, about how he had fought with his wife over letting use the pianos, about how he had stayed awake some nights worrying that she would never get the chance to show the world what she could do. "I always knew this day would come," he said. "I knew the world would see what I saw in that little girl who wandered into my shop all those years ago. I just did not know if I would live long enough to see it happen." Stayed with Mr. through the night. She held his hand as doctors came and went. She told him about and Sophie and all the children who were now being given chances because of the foundation she had created. She told him that his belief in one little girl had rippled outward to touch thousands of lives around the world. As dawn approached, Mr.'s condition worsened. The doctors said there was nothing more they could do, knew the end was near. "Mister," she said softly, "is there anything I can do for you? Anything at all?" The old man's eyes brightened with a sudden clarity. "Play for me, one last time. Play that song you made up when you were 8 years old, the one about the bird that wanted to fly." Looked around the hospital room. There was no piano. "I will be right back," she said. She ran out of the room and found a nurse. "Is there a piano anywhere in this hospital?" The nurse looked surprised by the urgent request, but nodded. "There is one in the chapel on the second floor, but visiting hours there do not start until 8. "Please," said, "my friend is dying. He asked me to play for him one more time. I will pay whatever fine you want. I will donate to the hospital, please." The nurse must have recognized because her eyes widened. "Oh my goodness, you are. My daughter is in one of your music programs. Wait here, I will get the keys to the chapel." 20 minutes later, hospital staff had carefully moved Mister's bed to the chapel where an old upright piano stood against one wall. The room was small and simple, but the morning light was beginning to stream through stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns across the floor. Sat at the piano and looked at Mister, who was propped up in his bed so he could see her. His eyes were barely open, but there was a peaceful smile on his face. She began to play. The song she played was simple, something she had created as a child without knowing anything about music theory or proper composition. It was about a bird trapped in a cage who dreamed of flying free. The melody rose and fell like wings beating against the wind. There were moments of sadness when the bird lost hope and moments of joy when it remembered that dreams never truly die. As she played, memories flooded through her mind. She remembered being 5 years old and touching piano keys for the first time. She remembered the dusty music shop and the smell of old wood and polish. She remembered Mister's patient voice explaining what each note meant, his gentle hands guiding her fingers to the right positions. She remembered being rejected and mocked and dismissed. She remembered nights of crying alone in her tiny apartment, wondering if anyone would ever hear her music. She remembered the charity event where everything changed and all the incredible things that had happened since. All of these memories poured into the simple melody, making it richer and deeper than it had ever been. Played for 10 minutes, then 15, then 20. She played through variations she had never tried before. She played with everything she had, knowing this would be the most important performance of her life. When she finally let the last note fade away, she looked at Mister. The old man's eyes were closed, but the smile remained on his face. His chest was no longer moving. James had died listening to the music of the little girl he had once helped, the girl who had grown up to become one of the greatest musicians the world had ever known. Sat beside his body for a long time, holding his hand and crying. Nurses and doctors came and went quietly, giving her space to grieve. They all knew who she was and what this man had meant to her. Finally, she stood and kissed Mister's forehead. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything. I promise I will never stop helping children like I once was. Your kindness will live on forever through the music they create." The funeral was held a week later, paid for everything and made sure it was beautiful without being extravagant, the way Mister would have wanted. Hundreds of people attended, including many who had known him through his little music shop, played a piece he had composed especially for the occasion. Sophie, the young girl from the palace, sang a song that brought everyone to tears. Delivered the eulogy. She told the story of a kind old man who had changed a little girl's life by believing in her when no one else did. She explained that this one act of kindness had rippled outward in ways no one could have imagined, touching thousands of lives and inspiring a global movement for music education. Mister never became rich or famous, said. He ran a small music shop until he was too old to work anymore. Most people outside this room have never heard his name, but his impact on the world is immeasurable. Because of him, music will continue to transform lives for generations to come. After the funeral, made a decision that would surprise everyone who knew her. She announced that she was taking a break from performing. Not forever, but for 1 year. She would use that time to personally visit Second Chance Project programs around the world, to meet the children being helped, and to make sure the foundation was living up to its mission. Many people thought she was crazy. She was at the peak of her career. Concert halls were offering her millions of dollars for single performances. Record companies were begging for new albums. Why would she step back now? His answer was simple. Fame without purpose is meaningless. Mister taught me that music is not about applause or money. It is about connecting with people, about expressing truth, about making the world a little bit better. I want to make sure I never forget that lesson. And so, the woman who had gone from being mocked at a charity event to becoming one of the most celebrated musicians in the world began the next chapter of her journey. A journey that would lead her to places and people she had never imagined, and that would eventually bring her back to where it all began. 5 years had passed since first stunned the world at that charity event. She was now 47 years old, with more silver in her hair but the same fire in her eyes that had burned since childhood. The year she had taken off from performing had stretched into 2 years as she traveled the globe, visiting every program supported by the Second Chance Project and personally mentoring dozens of young musicians. When she finally returned to the concert stage, It was not at a prestigious hall in New York or London. It was in the same neighborhood where she had grown up, at the very music school she had asked Richard to save on the night everything changed. The school had been transformed beyond recognition. What had once been a crumbling building with broken instruments was now a beautiful facility with state-of-the-art equipment. Over 300 children from the surrounding neighborhoods were enrolled in programs ranging from piano to violin to composition. Many of them came from families just like had been, families who could never have afforded music lessons without help. Had chosen this school for her comeback concert for a specific reason. In the audience tonight were not wealthy donors or famous celebrities. Instead, the seats were filled with children from the school and their families, with teachers and volunteers who had dedicated their lives to giving young people a chance, with people from the neighborhood who had known when she was just another poor kid with impossible dreams. Johnson, now 17 years old, sat in the front row. He had completed his studies at the Royal Academy of Music with the highest honors ever recorded. Concert halls around the world were already competing for his performances. Critics called him the next great pianist, the heir to his legacy. But he always insisted that everything he had achieved was because of the woman who had believed in him when he was just a scared boy from Mississippi. Beside sat Sophie, the girl had met at Palace. She was now 15 and studying at a music conservatory in London on a scholarship funded by the Second Chance Project. Her talent had blossomed under proper instruction, and she was already being compared to the great pianists of her generation. In the back of the auditorium sat Richard, the man who had once mocked and later became one of her strongest supporters. In the years since that night, he had donated over $50 million to music education. He served on the board of the Second Chance Project and personally reviewed scholarship applications from disadvantaged students. The arrogant billionaire who had judged people by their clothes had been transformed by the music he heard that fateful evening. Helena Crane was there too, the woman who had orchestrated its introduction to the world and had become one of her closest friends. She was in her 70s now, but still running the Crane Foundation with the same energy she had always had. Under her leadership, the Second Chance Project had grown into the largest music education program in the world, operating in 43 countries and reaching over 100,000 children. Wilson, the critic who had tried to destroy his reputation before ever hearing her play, had become one of her most vocal champions. His interview with her, published shortly after the Kennedy Center concert, had won multiple journalism awards. He now dedicated himself to writing about artists from unconventional backgrounds, using his platform to help discover talent that might otherwise be overlooked. As walked onto the stage of the school auditorium, the audience rose to their feet. The applause was warm and genuine, different from the polite clapping of formal concert halls. These people knew her. They remembered her as the girl who used to walk these streets. They had watched her rise from nothing to become one of the most famous musicians in the world. They were proud of her in a way that felt personal and real. Sat at the piano and looked out at the faces before her. She saw hope in the eyes of the children, who now had proof that dreams could come true no matter where you came from. She saw gratitude in the eyes of the parents, who knew their children had opportunities they themselves never had. She saw love in the eyes of Sophie and all the young musicians she had mentored over the years. She thought about Mr. and wished he could be here to see this moment. She thought about her parents, who had both passed away years ago, and hoped they were watching from somewhere. She thought about all the people who had helped her along the way and all the people she had helped in return. Then she began to play. The piece she had chosen was the same composition she had performed at the charity event 5 years ago, the one she had created over decades, the one that told the story of her life. But it had changed since then. New sections had been added, reflecting everything she had experienced in the years since the world discovered her. There was a passage about Mistress' death, full of sorrow but also gratitude. There was a section about Sophie and all the children who were now pursuing their dreams. There was music that spoke of triumph and music that whispered of doubt. There was joy and pain, hope and fear, love and loss. All the messy, complicated reality of being human was woven into these notes. Played for over an hour, taking the audience on a journey through her entire life. People laughed and cried and sat in stunned silence. Some held hands. Some closed their eyes and let the music wash over them. Some took out their phones to record, wanting to preserve this moment forever. When the final notes faded away, there was a moment of absolute stillness. Then the audience exploded with applause that seemed to shake the building. Children were jumping up and down. Parents were hugging each other. Teachers were wiping tears from their eyes. Stood and took a bow. She gestured for Sophie and several other young musicians from the school to join her on stage. They came up hesitantly, awed by the moment, and put her arms around them. "This is why I play," she said, her voice carrying through the microphone. "Not for fame or money or recognition. I play for these children. I play so they can see that where you come from does not determine where you can go. I play because music is the one thing that can truly change the world." She turned to address the audience directly. "5 years ago, I was mocked at a charity event by people who thought I did not belong. They judged me by my dress and my background and my lack of connections. They expected me to fail. But I sat down at that piano and played my truth, and something miraculous happened. People listened." She paused, collecting herself. "I want every child in this room to understand something. You have talent. You have value. You deserve every opportunity that any other child in the world has. Never let anyone tell you that you are not good enough because of where you come from. Never let anyone make you feel small. Your dreams are valid. Your abilities are real. And if you work hard and believe in yourself, you can achieve things that seem impossible." Invited all the children in the audience to come up on stage. Nearly 100 of them crowded around the piano, their faces bright with excitement. She showed them how to press the keys, how to feel the vibration of the notes, how to become part of the music. Then she did something unexpected. She stepped away from the piano and gestured for to take her place. "Your turn," she said. "Show them what is possible." Sat at the piano and began to play. His fingers danced across the keys with a skill that left the children gasping. He played a piece that was playful and energetic, designed to make young people fall in love with music. The children watched in amazement, some trying to follow his movements, others just staring in wonder. When finished, Sophie took his place and played something gentle and beautiful. Then another young musician, and another. One by one, the students who had been helped by the Second Chance project demonstrated the talent that had been nurtured and developed through programs had helped create. It went on for hours, this celebration of music and possibility. When it finally ended, the auditorium slowly emptied, leaving alone on the stage where so many dreams had been born. She sat at the piano one more time and played a simple melody. The song about the bird that wanted to fly, the one she had composed as a child and played for Mister in his final moments. She played it softly, just for herself, remembering everything that had brought her to this place. Outside, the sun was setting over the neighborhood where she had grown up poor and forgotten, but was not forgotten anymore. Her music had touched millions of lives. Her story had inspired people around the world. Her legacy would live on through every child who was given a chance because of what she had built. She finished playing and closed the piano lid. The auditorium was empty and quiet, but she could still feel the energy of everything that had happened. The laughter of the children, the tears of the parents, the pride of the young musicians, the love of the community. As she walked out of the school and into the evening air, smiled. She thought about the little girl who had wandered into a music shop so many years ago and touched piano keys for the first time. That little girl could never have imagined this life, this journey, this purpose. But that little girl had never stopped believing. And because she never stopped believing, thousands of other children now had the chance to believe too. to dream, to work, to achieve the impossible. That was the true meaning of story, not fame or awards or recognition. The true meaning was every single child who heard her play and thought maybe, just maybe, they could do it too. Walked home through the streets of her childhood, surrounded by the sound of pianos playing in houses and apartments, the music of a new generation taking flight. The bird had finally learned to fly, and it had taught countless others to fly with it.